Welcome to Ferment Radio, a podcast series on bacterial and social fermentation. Fermentation can incite social action, spark creativity, and bring surprising new tastes to our lives. My name is Aga Pokrywka, and I invite you to join us in a conversation on living interconnectivities, from macro to micro, from societal to cellular, and from global to personal. Have you ever heard of slime mold? These organisms might not have a nervous system or even a brain, but they have impressive problem-solving abilities. Slime mold can navigate through mazes and find the most efficient routes to find food. Some researchers have already been inspired by them to design more efficient transportation networks, urban planning, and solving optimizational problems. However, they are shrouded in a haze of mystery. They are hard to observe, and classify. You guessed right, they are not microbes, but they can be microscopic at certain stages of their life cycle. That's why they have already been featured on Ferment Radio before. On this episode, together with Heather Barnett, an artist and university professor at Central St. Martin's University of the Arts London, working with natural phenomena, complex systems, and playful pedagogies, we look at slime molds beyond the instrumental features and focus on their intrinsical importance as a remarkable life form. Instead of thinking, what can we extract from this species, we want to ask ourselves, what can we actually learn from them? Join us in this fascinating and meandering, or shall we say, Slimemoldesque conversation.
My name's Heather Barnett. I'm an artist working with living systems and imaging technologies. So I'm interested in the kind of the behaviours of living systems. I'm particularly interested in superorganisms where individuals operate within a collective entity. So I've done a lot of work with slime mold cells, with ant colonies. I kind of consider humans a superorganism as well, and I'm interested in the sort of relational aspects between different systems, between different species. So kind of slime molds, humans, ants are my main kind of subjects of interest.
Why would you think that humans are superorganisms?
I think maybe we need to come back to that because in a way I don't. And I think that's why I'm interested in these other organisms, these other systems that I think that we can look at and learn from and can think about how we operate as collectives. So, what's interesting about these organisms is the way it's how the individual operates within a group and in relation to the environment. So it's that kind of those 3 points of the individual, the collective, and the interactions with the environment. And humans are good at that in some ways. They're good at coordinating in some ways, but they're not very good at kind of self-organization, and they're not always well attuned to working with the environment.
I know that you've been doing some experiments, in a way taking like a slime molds as a model organisms for a human to perform together. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so slime molds are really interesting on so many levels. So biologically, they're really interesting in terms of their life cycle and their kind of the movement. They're really interesting in terms of ideas of cognition and intelligence. They can problem solve, they can learn, they can navigate. And there's lots of different research areas kind of trying to understand how the organism is working. And the organism is a bunch of cells. It doesn't have any brain, so there's not a single neuron in a slime mold. It doesn't have sensory organs. It's a really, really simple biological structure, yet it can do many, many things that and it's flummoxing many scientists. Lots of people just do not really understand how it can operate beyond the kind of its parts. But it's kind of interesting in itself as a subject, but it's also really interested in how it works and the kind of the models it can provide us to think about things. So a model organism in scientific terms is considered a thing to know with, or a kind of an analogous biological thing that maybe you can't work with a large organism. So for practical or ethical reasons, you work with a different organism, you work with a model to learn from. And I think in more kind of artistic or interdisciplinary terms, the slime mold is a really interesting model, more metaphorically, of thinking, well, what is this behavior that we see in this context, and how do we understand it? How do we relate to it? What does it tell us about ourselves? So the slime mold is in many ways a vehicle through which we can think about things, and those things might include, definitions of intelligence. How can an organism without a brain compute? How can it solve problems? How can it learn and pass learning on? How can it anticipate events? We can think about cooperation and collective behavior. So this organism is many millions of individual nuclei all operating within one kind of membrane, constantly shuttling around information between these many cells. So how does it communicate? How does it reach agreement? How does it make decisions as a collective? So I find it a kind of quite malleable metaphor for thinking about sort of many behaviors, phenomena that are that help us kind of connect outside of just being human, that allow us a bit of kind of imaginary space to think about other forms of being, other forms of knowing.
You work with slime mold for many years, so I believe that you have some better sense, for example, than I do have, like what we can learn from these super organisms. So if we would take from that learning, since we are just starting the interview, could we find some rules or some improvements for how we are even having the conversation right now, learning from the slime molds? We are just two people, so it's not like we are really like it's very collaborative process, but still, if there is anything the slime mold would do in this very setup, metaphorically, of course, talking.
Okay, so if we think a slime mold cell is a bunch of cells shuttling around, it's constantly shape-shifting, it's never fixed. The slime mold is constantly curious and exploratory. It's nomadic. It's a great forager. So its behavior, it branches out in its growth patterns, looking for nutrients. And when it finds nourishment, it forms strong networks between sources. So then it creates many nodes within a complex network. So for a human conversation, that might get really messy because it wouldn't have any kind of linear. It's multi-directional. It is considered, Fusarium polycephalum is the slime mold that I tend to work with, and polycephalum translates as many-headed. So it is, if you imagine this yellow branching gloopy thing, conversationally that could be problematic because we'd be all over the place all the time, and maybe that's the art of a good human conversation. Never really knowing where it's going, but constantly seeking novelty or nourishment.
It sounds like early forms of internet.
It behaves in a similar way. There's kind of emergent systems. Stephen Johnson wrote a great book on emergence that relates different phenomena from slime mold cells to ant colonies to cities, and how cities behave to the internet and the World Wide Web. These kind of self-organizing, non-hierarchical systems where information can be distributed in kind of myriad, multiple ways. So yes, I think this is going to be a kind of meandering conversation. Then, if it's going to be Slimemoldesque, it may be a little bit all over the place.
When you perform experiments, let's say on humans or human collaboration, so humans can kind of be inspired by what we already know about slime molds. Could you tell a little bit like how this came into being, like even thinking about translating like a one organism to another in a playful way? And also like what would be the learnings beyond already we talked about, right?
Yeah, so I started an experiment called Bee in Slime Mold a number of years ago. And this was after I'd been working with the organism directly for a few years. And by working with the organism, I create environments and introduce slime mold into that environment and capture its growth behavior through time-lapse photography, and intervene with it. So I've sort of the palette as of that working as an artistic practice is understanding the conditions of this biological material, what it needs to be happy, to perform. So that's environmental conditions, attractants, repellents, and that becomes my tools to try to create a scenario where the slime mold will do something interesting. And so I exhibit those films, and it's an invitation to engage with this biological behavior that we cannot see. The slime mold grows very slowly by our standards, by our kind of temporal understanding. So time-lapse photography amplifies the biological behavior that is beyond our human limitations. And that's one mode of engaging with the organism, is through observation. But I was interested in pushing it. The slime mold, it understands its world through a sensory communication system. It's chemically sensing its environment. So its sensorial world is hugely different to ours. So I started thinking about, well, how could we kind of translate or extract some of the biological rules from one organism and apply it to another? And that's where the Bee in Slime Mold experiment came from. So it's taken some fundamental behavioral rules from the slime mold, and how it communicates, what its motivation is, how it kind of responds to as a kind of supercell, and with it in relation to its environment, and then give those rules in a simplified form to a group of humans and see what happens. So it's an exploratory experiment. It is kind of an invitation for emergent behavior. So to see, following these simple rules, how do people interpret? How do they behave within it? And what are the observations? So in a way, it doesn't have an intention. It doesn't have an aim. It kind of runs for a set period of time, and then we kind of deconstruct it, kind of what happened there, and how did you find behaving as one cell within a supercell. And it's very open-ended. But what's really interesting in these discussions afterwards is the diversity of interpretations, how different people bring their own experience, their own disciplinary perspective. I've had conversations with biologists or psychologists or anthropologists that all have a very different take on this experience of trying to be a slime mold. And yeah, so it's a way, this idea of the slime mold as a vehicle. It kind of permits us to behave in a way that we wouldn't normally, and it's intentionally playful and kind of absurd, because it should be a fun activity that isn't taken too seriously. Though some people do take it very seriously. But some comments from people who've participated in being slime mold, I said, well, it actually reveals, it holds up a mirror to how we are as humans, what the possibilities are, what our limitations are, and because obviously we can't not be human, we can't be slime mold, we will never let go of our humanness. But by trying to, it can make us aware of what humanness means, and not just take it for granted. So it's a way of decentering from the human, thinking about other forms of embodied knowledge, kind of embodied being, ideas of the collective. There is no ego in a slime mold.
When we hear, on I don't know, in various, flashy news about slime molds, it's usually that, like slime molds solved, I don't know, maze, which is like resembling communication network in Tokyo or something. And what you are describing or exploring in your work is also talking about something which is like beyond this kind of pragmatism, if you know what I mean. It like talks about things which are much more intangible or ephemeral. It's not like you can, I don't know, employ these organisms in order to kind of keep doing things as we are doing, but rather as humans, but rather like reflect how we are doing it, as you said, in a mirror of the slime molds. Since we are kind of, I will be exercising this slime mold like conversation, and which is very non-linear, as you said, and this summer, I for the first time met slime mold in the nature, and I was very excited about it. And I have to say that if I would not like familiarize myself with this topic before, I think, or I would not notice it, or I would like freak out because, it was this yellow one, which looks like I don't know what happened there. It was like a lump, like actually pretty big. It was maybe like, like my palm, like of like a yellow puke. And I was like, I was very honored to meet them because I think they show themselves very rarely. Especially it was pretty dark already in that place where we had this encounter. But it also made me wonder, like, what was your first encounter with this organism, and how did you feel about it?
So my first encounter with slime mold wasn't in nature. I wasn't foraging. Its natural habitat, it lives in woodland. So it sounds like you found it in the perfect conditions. Slime mold likes dark, damp conditions. It grows in kind of temperate woodlands. And there are many, many different species of slime molds, I think around 1,000. But my first encounter was in a Petri dish. I was gifted a Petri dish of slime mold by the late Dr. Simon Park, who was a wonderful creative microbiologist who worked with many artists over the years, working with microorganisms and bacteria. And I was on a kind of speculative lab visit with Simon, because I'd previously worked with other living systems. And showed me around the lab, and we were chatting about respective research and practice. And as I left, he gave me a little Petri dish with a yellow blob in it, and said, "Oh, you might like to play with this. It likes to be kept dark and damp, and it feeds porridge oats." And that was it. That was the kind of instigation. So I took it home and grew it, put it in a shoebox because it needs to be kept dark, and grew it on agar or wet felt. Just tried lots of different kind of substrates that would hold moisture, keep that nice humidity that it likes. Fed it on oats, tried other food sources, and just kind of threw a lot of stuff at it and started to do little time lapses that were very crude and rough and ready initially. But it's just through kind of being with the organism and trying things out and observing how it responded, I started to observe interesting things happening. So I started looking at the published research and uncovered thousands of papers from different disciplinary areas on the wonders of slime mold. And then found corroboration of what I was observing from the organism was identified and described in the scientific literature. And the interest has grown from there. So I've been working with slime mold on and off for over 12 years. I think it's probably nearly 14 years now. And I kind of keep coming back to it because it kind of keeps drawing me back. There are kind of questions that I want to explore, either working with it in the studio or working with other people, kind of processes of co-inquiry. This kind of idea of the model organism for artistic research and for kind of experiential exploration is something I'm really interested in.
Do you still have like descendants of this first colony you got?
My slime molds, they're sleeping. So I have boxes of slime mold sclerota, which is one of its kind of states of existence. It can dry up and as a little kind of scab and wait for more resourceful times.
Oh, wow. So it can awaken from that dry state?
Yes, it can.
Wow.
Yeah. I think that's one of the most impressive things about slime mold is its life cycle, and it can choose what to do. So if resources run out, it will stay in this kind of creeping plasmodium, the kind of the many-headed gloopy state, whilst resources are plentiful. But if it gets too dry or too cold, it will do one of two things. It will either dry up into a little scab, and that can be just spring back to life with moisture at a later time, or it can grow fruiting bodies, stalks with this quite beautiful structures, and they contain spores which will get taken on the wind, and it will start the whole life cycle again. So there aren't many organisms that have a kind of choice of decision to make about how they alter their state when times get tough.
So basically, it's quite difficult to for them to die in a way. Like they will survive in any form.
They're really resilient. Yeah, they might not be quite as resilient as tardigrades, I think or cockroaches, but it is quite difficult to kill a slime mold because they have these mechanisms to dry up, to change states. Yeah, they are pretty resilient.
We are talking here how we can reflect on society or humanity itself through observing slime mold. And I wonder, is there anything that, for example, impacted you on a personal level? Like some learning that really, like, besides this, that you started, I don't know, to give your oath to the slime mold, which for sure has some sort of an impact. But I'm just thinking from my personal kind of perspective when, like years ago, I started to more kind of consciously do fermentation and like look into this, what it is, like what is there and why it happens. So I have to say that it really I think it changed me in some level. I know it sounds like cheesy and cheap, but it's curious to think how these things can also be impactful in kind of a, very personal way in a way.
My curiosity initially was intellectual. Of what a curious organism, it can do all these things, and and aesthetic as well. I find it incredibly beautiful, the way that those branching patterns that we see across all scales in nature. That's that kind of bifurcating branching is a very efficient mechanism for biology, but it's it has a strong aesthetic thing, but I think my relationship with the organism and how I relate to it and how I kind of bring others into that kind of conversation and that inquiry has definitely changed over the years. Initially I called it a collaboration. I mean, I always put collaboration in heavily inverted commas because it's not a two-way collaboration. The slime mold is not choosing to work with me, but it is a form of co-inquiry, and I acknowledge the slime mold as a co-creator. I couldn't make it on his own. I am not manipulating the material in a way a painter would, manipulate oils on a canvas. Obviously, there's still a kind of any material, there are its inherent properties and you have to work with them. But if you're working with a living system, there's a whole subjective kind of ontological, fundamental needs of that organism. So I have to work with what it needs to survive and be happy. So there is this kind of what I did call a collaboration. I think is now closer to ideas of sort of benevolent slavery. It's kind of I'm kind of seeking the organism to perform for me, for my camera. But I feel I'm the kind of spokesperson for this organism in revealing it, an uninvited spokesperson. And I'm a farmer, I'm a carer, I'm a caretaker, I'm a slave master. I'm many things in relation to this organism. I'm a mediator, I'm a facilitator, I'm a spokesperson of kind of getting other people to look, here's an interesting organism. It does amazing things. Let's think about it, and how does it make us think about many other things? So there's definitely a kind of a relational shift and a perspective shift. Another thing is it's kind of slowed me down. You can't rush a slime mold. You can't control it, and I really like that. I'm creating the conditions, hoping it will do something interesting. I've learned, I've accumulated a lot of tacit and explicit knowledge about slime molds over the years. But so I can predict what it might do in a given situation, but it very rarely does what I think it will do. So it's constantly surprising me. And it has agency, it has autonomy in that creative process. Obviously it's functioning in a very different way to I am. And, but there is that relinquishing of control, which I really like as an artist, that I'm not trying to get it to do something for me. I'm inviting it to kind of reveal itself, to present itself to another audience.
I wonder how much something we learn or you learn from relating to slime molds could also be an exercise in relating to, I don't know, even other humans who are just very different than we are. Because we are talking here about it, humans or humanity as we would be the same, but actually, I don't know, I had experiences to meet other humans that I was like, wow, we are from really different planets, and how we are going now to relate to each other.
Yeah, I think because the slime mold, it is very alien. It doesn't look like us. It doesn't sense in the same way. It operates in a very different kind of time frame, a different scale. It doesn't share our body pattern in any way, or how we kind of perceive and understand the world. Yet, it possesses traits that we do recognize as kind of quintessentially human. It can learn, it can remember, it can anticipate things, it can be reactive and responsive in a really kind of sensitive way. So it is relatable yet alien, and I think that kind of simultaneity between being very different and very similar, it's one and it's many simultaneously. Its sex states are just dumbfounding. There's a report that it has 720 different sex states because it's kind of sexually reproducing in some states and cloning in others. It's diploid and haploid. It is kind of this and that. It's many things all at once. So it's not something that can be kind of fixed with an identity or kind of pinned down. So I think it does make us think about difference.
Slime molds, they do have some of the features which are really extraordinary, and they sound like from a, some sci-fi story rather than something which is, you can find during your walk in the forest. If you could possess some of the superpowers they are having, what it would be?
There are some sci-fi references that are kind of attributed to slime molds. So the Blob is largely held to be related to slime molds, and I've just recently reread Solaris, Slavislav Lem, about it's not a slime mold, but it's an ocean that has sentience.
But were you thinking about slime molds in regarding to the ocean in Solaris?
Not when I read it the first time 20 years ago, but rereading it now, it's kind of the idea of a sentience embodied in this kind of different form. So whether it's an ocean that thinks, or a kind of gloopy slime mold cell that is thinking in a different way. So yeah, I've been reading Solaris, thinking that's definitely kind of Slimemoldesque.
I never thought about it, but now when you say about this, makes sense.
And I'm sure there are other kind of connections to science fiction phenomena, because it is an organism, but it's also a phenomenon, kind of possessed or embodied in this organism. But yeah, we're doing the meandering thing. You asked about superpowers, or kind of what would the slime think? I think, because there's loads of, as you were saying earlier, this kind of the research that's more instrumental of kind of navigating mazes, problem solving, forming, optimizing networks between food points. So there's the kind of mapping potential. It's got many kind of attributes, but I think the most significant superpower would be the life cycle. The fact that this organism, when resources aren't healthy, when it runs out of food or it's gets too dry, it can choose what it does next, and it can choose a dormant state and just wait for better times and be reconstituted and jump back to life. That is, that's got to be the most powerful thing, that the environment becomes hostile and we can just change our state to either wait for a better time or to find another environment that is more conducive, and something that's so pertinent to the times that we are in. And there is an environmental kind of connection with Slimemold, because it is so attuned to its environment constantly. As it grows, it's finding resource in its environment. It's reacting to avoiding things that it finds repellent, seeking things that it's attracted to, and it is constantly sensing its environment. So as a form of intelligence, and the question of how we define intelligence, I think it is, on that alone, it surpasses us in terms of intelligence, because we are the only organism that is actively destroying its own habitat. So that's definitely something that we can learn from organisms that work with their environment far more attuned way.
I was thinking about something much more practical, that one could be like present in two different places, like checking this or that, and then make a decision based on actual experience and not just like imagining, because they can definitely go into different directions, check this out, and choose the option which is better for them, which I find quite impossible for human in its current shape.
Yeah, there are humans that use slime molds as an oracle. Oliver Kellhammer, Canadian artist, sets questions. What color shoes should he wear? Slime mold decides. Is there a god? The slime mold decides. So the organism becomes an oracle and helps him in decision making, from practical to sublime decisions.
I haven't heard about it, but it sounds fantastic.
Yeah, there's so many people working with slime molds in interesting and different ways, asking different questions of this organism and working with it in a material form, but also as it's kind of idea of a model and metaphorical model.
Yeah, that's curious, but it also seems like still a little bit like it's a niche at the end. It's not like I have to say that I learned about the existence of slime molds in my life very late. Like I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. I don't know if this is something which I am like a totally, I don't think that actually this is so rare to not know about them.
I don't think they are well known. In terms of as an organism, they have appeared on some nature programs. BBC Nature did a program about autumn, and because the slime molds help digest kind of the rotting vegetation in the forest, that's their kind of ecological contribution. But because people will just see it, they'll think it's lichen or a kind of fungal growth, because you're not seeing it moving. Its top speed is about 1 centimetre an hour. There's loads going on in that cell if you look at it under the microscope, constantly particles shuttling around all over the place. But it's so easily ignored, and because it likes dark, damp areas, it grows, right in the undergrowth on rotting logs, and we just don't see it unless we kind of know it's there and we turn a log and we take time to observe. So I don't think they are very well known. In the last 20 years, because the maze experiment was the experiment that really sort of came, kind of transcended from just being within the scientific literature to more wider journalism, because that was the experiment that demonstrated that slime mold had a primitive form of intelligence, and then everybody argued about how we define intelligence, and the jury's still out. Arguments persist in interesting ways. Yeah. So I think there's more and more awareness of them, kind of, as a research organism, maybe, rather than them as a biological organism in their natural habitat, but as a laboratory experimental system. It's the last 20 years with these navigation, problem solving, network optimization, that they're seen as a biological computer, and people are trying to decode what the organism is doing and develop algorithms to model that. So there's a real relationship between the biological and computational. That's quite a big area of slime mold research.
I'm actually wondering about how much there is more and more being spoken these days about like alternative ways of organizing, like how organizations work and how kind of power is distributed within organizations. I'll be very curious to see if there is any research trying to kind of employ the findings from what we know at the moment about slime molds to design this kind of more like a human-oriented systems. Because I believe that those systems you were talking about, they are more maybe in technology or some like computer systems.
Yeah, and I think that the computational aspect is really looking at it, kind of as a structural, what's happening mathematically within that organism. But I think what you're that idea of organizational structures is more kind of holistic. It's at a different scale and tuning into a different kind of behavior. It's non-hierarchical. There isn't a part of that cell that's in charge and dictating. It's a completely flat hierarchy, entirely self-organizing. It's just the kind of multiple agents, cells within that system in constant communication with each other. And through that constant communication and those flows of information, knowledge is generated, information is distributed, and the kind of the intelligence is the emergent property of those interactions. So if you think about that at a human level, we have organizations which tend to be highly hierarchical structures, this kind of cascading of information from the top down. And then we can find examples that contradict that are more self-organizing. And more recently, you can think of Extinction Rebellion, Black Lives Matter. There is still kind of leadership and structure kind of within those organizations, but they're much lower hierarchy, and they rely on bottom-up organization and more kind of democratic and collective action and decision making. So I think, and there are some companies, commercial companies, that try to kind of lower the hierarchy and be more self-organizing. So some, I think, games companies and
Definitely, but I haven't heard anybody taking from the slime mold to design that yet.
I once did a talk at a Financial Times conference on this kind of question about human organizational structures, and got a load of corporates to be slime mold, which was highly entertaining in a London Mayfair hotel. And that was a kind of question to throw at them. If we take this kind of system from the slime mold and how it's working, how could we apply it? What could we extract from how that system works in a slime mold world to how it could work in a human world? Obviously, we have to be really careful when we're comparing kind of what works for a slime mold and what would work for humans. Obviously, they're completely different systems. These aren't literal translations, but this kind of decoding and recoding, decoding from one organism or one system and and recoding for another system, I think it's really interesting. I worked with a choreographer and dancer, Emma Ribbing, who's based in Sweden, Malmö, and we did some movement research looking at, kind of inspired by the slime mold, looking at kind of collective behavior and embodied intelligence, but thinking from a perspective of regeneration, of actually which subjectivities do you take on board when you're regenerating in an urban area. We tend to, urban developers tend to think purely from a human perspective, and maybe, thinking about infrastructure, but infrastructure to serve humans. So we were kind of interested in exploring, well, if you take in other subjectivities of actually what the subjectivity of that infrastructure or the subjectivity of other organisms within that environment, would you redevelop, would you regenerate in different ways? Would you make decisions in different ways? Again, kind of, speculative and open-ended. We don't have the answers, but it's just, working with this organism as a way of asking the questions, and exploring the questions in a different way. Because I think, by thinking with slime mold, it allows you to just shift frame, shift perspective, speculatively, imaginatively, hypothetically, that hopefully opens up other ways of thinking, that we're not just entrenched in one mode of thinking. We can think outside of ourselves a little bit, which will hopefully gain better insights and more imaginative solutions.
Wow, slime molds are indeed a universe in of their own right. Thank you, Heather, for this inspiring conversation. If you would like to get more into slime molds, check out the website of the Slime Mold Collective, where artists, scientists, and other people share their Slimemoldesque research, knowledge, experiments, and images. If you like this episode, please share it. If you would like to know more about the show, listen to this episode again, or find previous episodes, please go to fermentradio.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. We would love to know what you thought of this conversation. Hear your human microbial stories and your suggestions for the future episodes. We are always looking forward to hearing from you at hello@fermentradio.com. You can also leave us an audio message by connecting to us on our Instagram. Ferment Radio is brought to you by Super Eclectic, and it's supported by Microbial Lives, Practices of New Human Microbial Cultures, a project at the Center of the Social Study of Microbes. This particular episode was recorded during a residency at the BioArt Society, Finland. I am very grateful for this support, and most of all, with all our amazing Ferment Radio listeners. Keep fermenting and stay tuned for the next episode of Ferment Radio.